Hi everybody, my name is Bridgitte Calder. I'm a psychologist working in Witherslack, and today, alongside a wonderful occupational therapist called Jess, we are going to be talking to you about how to support your children navigate transitions in education.
Hi everyone, my name's Jess Seals. I work as an occupational therapist with the Witherslack group. I'll also be delivering this presentation today alongside my lovely colleague Bridgitte Calder.
So let's start by talking about why change is so difficult. As humans, we are creatures of habit, and even when change is expected, it takes a lot of energy and resources to navigate. We like things to stay the same, we like predictability, we like our routines, we like to know what to expect out of the day ahead. And when there is any element of potential for change, that can bring about a lot of uncertainty and anxiety for us. And change can end up feeling quite unsafe. And ultimately, we can kind of be pushed outside of our window of tolerance, which is something we'll be talking about a bit later in our webinar. It can be very difficult to cope with, and it can be very difficult to, find your way through the feelings that come up when we're faced with change, especially that potentially is unexpected or can provide additional demands upon us. So when we're transitioning away from activities that we really enjoy and something that we know we have to do but don't really want to do, that is also where we see additional complications in knowing how to approach it, how to manage it, and how to navigate what can be quite challenging. For children returning to school, there's a lot of additional demands that can be placed upon them, which makes that change and transition even more complicated. So they have additional social demands. So all of a sudden they've gone from spending 6 weeks with their family and people that they know and feel comfortable with to being confronted with a huge group of peers that they have to then get to know potentially or re-establish relationships with, and it can be really challenging to find their way through all of that additional social pressure. They have the additional pressure of education, so needing to learn and focus and take in information and absorb. They have extra demands placed upon them because they're being expected to do things all the time and being asked to do things by engaging in their education or completing activities. They have a lot of different sensory pressures. So schools are huge environments a lot of the time, or incredibly loud and busy places with lots of colours and textures and sounds and smells, and it can be really kind of overwhelming from a sensory perspective. We've also got a change to routine. So they've had the summer holidays where there's possibly been a little bit less routine because that's what happens during holidays, to then being faced with quite a structured day. So that whole shift back into a school-based routine can be really anxiety-provoking and challenging. And the additional issue of being away from their family. Like I said, I've spent 6 weeks of being in a really safe environment around people that they love and feel safe with and trust, to then having to be away from those people and having to face a whole new batch of different faces sometimes as well. So change for our children can be, particularly complex. So for autistic children, they can see the world as an incredibly confusing and overwhelming place, and that can create an adaptive need for sameness and predictability. That is why so many of our children who are autistic can find real safeness in routine and things that stay the same and have a kind of explicit knowledge of what's going to be happening and what to expect. For children with ADHD, they might struggle with regulating their attention when turning their attention to something they're expected to do rather than something that they find rewarding. You might well find if your child has got ADHD that they're incredibly focused on particular things that they really get a lot from, but can really struggle when that focus has to turn towards something that they know that they have to do rather than want to do. For children with sensory processing issues, they could easily get really overstimulated in schools, and everything can feel like it's moving too fast. So they crave any way that they can to feel calm and in control. And then finally, for children with anxiety, there's a lot of fear of the unknown and what might happen next. So transitions back into school confront them with all these what ifs and what ifs and what ifs. So it adds an extra level of complexity for them too. Most importantly, it's really important to consider the role that trauma plays in challenges navigating transitions. A lot of our children have been traumatised by various different experiences. Even just through navigating the world, it can be an incredibly traumatic and difficult place to be. So there's so many ways in which these two experiences, so trauma and transition, can interplay that can make it really challenging for our children. So difficult previous experiences with loss, change and endings and goodbyes can leave them with that feeling of unpredictability, powerlessness and abandonment, which any day-to-day transition might well bring up for them. Their bodies potentially prepared and tuned in to any potential experience of abandonment or any potential experience of a lack of predictability or powerlessness. So any moment within the day that could actually even sort of touch upon that sense and that experience could bring it all flooding back in one go. They may struggle more with regulating their emotions and their arousal state. So we've just talked about how change is anxiety provoking. So if you think about the combination of struggling to manage different emotions and navigate those things and being confronted with potentially lots of different anxiety provoking situations, that's a really tricky combination. They may have difficulties with cognitive skills, so they may struggle with the impact of cause and effect. They may struggle with planning and with consequential thinking. So again, trying to see how they fit and how they can kind of find their way through the change could be really challenging and tricky. They may have difficulties with impulse control, so not responding to potentially urges and impulses that they're experiencing during their anxiety-provoking transition could be really challenging. They may well have increased difficulties with sensory processing and integration. They may experience high levels of anxiety and worries, and ultimately they are stuck in survival mode. They are stuck in a position where all things could potentially feel quite threatening and overwhelming. So just to help understand a little bit more of how our children's brains respond when things can feel really overwhelming, I'm just going to introduce you to a model. It's the hand model of the brain. It just helps to explain why our children experience the world in the way that they do. So if you imagine that my wrist here is the spinal cord, the bottom of my hand, I'll just move it across a bit, the bottom of my hand is the brainstem, which is the base of our skull. My thumb, as I tuck it in, is our limbic region, so our hippocampus and our amygdala, which is our emotional computer. We then have our cortex that wraps over the top of the emotional computer. What happens when we're faced with threat and anxiety and overwhelm is our emotional computer starts sounding the alarm and we respond with a survival mode, which means we ultimately disconnect ourselves from that cortex that allows us to use imagination and reasoning and rationality. So for a moment, when we're in that threatened state where our emotional brain has kind of sounded the alarm, we have lost connection to our cortex. We've lost connection to the part of us that can be rational. So we're stuck in a survival state where we are feeling everything around us and we are responding in a survival mode. It's only when we feel safe that we can start to bring that cortex back online and use our brain for all different wonderful executive functions that we need when it comes to learning and understanding the world around us and navigating relationships and being who we are. So if we think about anxiety as the alarm sounding and the disconnect and the flipping the lid of that part of the brain that gives us a chance to plan and resolve and problem solve and be rational, our children are stuck in this survival mode, which is flooding their body with all the sorts of different adrenaline that means that they are reacting to those emotions in that survival state and they are unable to see their way through. So we need to make sure that our schools and our systems are designed to bring that top back down, to stop children, hopefully in the first place, from flipping their lid with what they do. If we can provide the safety and the containment to bring that system back online, it means that we get back access to their wonderful personalities and all the possibilities they've got for solving the problems and talking and communicating about how they're feeling, and therefore finding their way through the difficulties they might experience during transitions. So Jess is going to talk to you briefly now about engine speeds and how that fits in with our flipping the lid model, and then I'll come back to you about the window of tolerance.
Yeah, so leading on from what Bridgitte has just said, I just want to talk a little bit about regulation and how that might look like on a scale and things we might notice before we get to the point of dysregulation where the lid is flipped. So looking at the picture, we've got some pictures of cars, and I want you all to imagine that you've got an engine inside you. We've all got engines, these engines inside us, And everyone's engine runs slightly differently. Everyone's engine gets affected by different things. So starting from the blue side is a picture of a car that doesn't look very well, maybe a bit slow, a bit sleepy. So I'd say the engine speed of that one quite low, not really moving much. And then up to the green, engine speed probably a little bit higher, probably running quite good. See a little thumbs up there from him. So next engine speed, the yellow. Okay, the revs have probably stepped up now. The engine speed is going quite a bit now. And then the next one, red engine speed. So the speed has really picked up now. The revs are really high, and then at this point, this is when it can result in the flipping the lid. So now we know a little bit more about engine speeds and the scale of regulation. I just wanted to try and relate it to something maybe familiar that you might know. So these Disney characters, so we've got Eeyore, Winnie the Pooh and Tigger, and they all have very, very different engine speeds. So we'll start with Eeyore. I'd probably describe his behaviour as quite slow, maybe sluggish, quite passive. Maybe he misses some like cues or doesn't quite hear someone talking to him. Quite low engagement from Eeyore. And then we've got Winnie the Pooh. I'd say he's quite content, quite calm, tolerant, quite good communication, quite effective communication from Winnie the Pooh, whereas Eeyore's communication is probably quite slow. And then we've got Tigger. Tigger's engine speed, I'd say, is quite high. So Tigger's quite bouncy. Maybe has difficulty switching off at night. Difficult with like transitions and changes, busy environments, just always bouncing around. So he would be at quite the high end of the scale. But being at the high end of the scale doesn't necessarily mean that he's ready to flip his lid. So yes, his engine speed's high, but it all depends what takes your engine speed to the highest point where you might flip your lid and crash.
So I'm just going to bring us back to that model I mentioned earlier, which is called the window of tolerance, and just give a little bit more information, and it will link in quite nicely with what Jess has just talked to you about your children's engine speed. So we all have a window of tolerance within which we can navigate the world and deal with the problems that life throws at us. The more challenges, adversity and trauma we've been through, the narrower our window can be. And it can mean that we end up feeling really overwhelmed by issues and problems and scenarios and situations that other people may not get overwhelmed by. A lot of our children have quite a narrow window of tolerance, and actually what it means is things can feel really overwhelming very quickly. So they might tip into being quite dysregulated from what can seem to us for no reason. So I often hear, well, there wasn't anything that seemed to trigger that, or out of nowhere they can start to feel really angry. That might well be that they're just sitting in a really narrow window of tolerance, and something that can seem quite insignificant to us has just tipped them out really quickly into a period of dysregulation where they feel agitated and overwhelmed. And if that isn't then brought back into a sense of safeness, we can see this explosion of hyperarousal, which will be really angry, really anxious, and feel really out of control. Or on the other end of the spectrum, we might see the children shutting down, zoning out, going numb and withdrawing. So what we want to do in the work that clinical teams do with the children in our schools is we work on widening that window through building up lots of different strategies and lots of different techniques. And we're going to introduce you to plenty of them that will help your children navigate their transitions during this webinar. So when we're outside of our window, these are some of the things that we might see in our children. We might see them surround themselves with barbed wire, going into attack mode, going into their own protective bubble, whizzing around like a dart, freezing on the spot, trying to make themselves invisible and small. It can be really helpful to have these sorts of conversations with your children and see if they can identify what happens to them when they're in moments of feeling unsafe and overwhelmed. So if you start to know and notice what strategies they put up, what defences you see in them, it means you can start to plan for and support them in developing strategies to help them feel safe again when you see those indicators that they're struggling. So Jess is now going to talk to you about what sort of experiences might push somebody outside of their window of tolerance.
So I'm going to talk a bit about sensory processing, as this can often be a big thing that puts us outside our window of tolerance. Sensory processing is something we all do. We're literally doing it now as I speak. Our bodies are continuously processing sensory information. Even when we're asleep, our body never stops processing this information. However, although we're all experiencing the same sensory processing right now as you're listening to my voice, everybody's processing of this is different. We're all perceiving this moment differently to each other. And that's because we all have different levels of processing speeds and tolerance. Some of you might have the radio on in the background whilst listening to this. Some of you might have the sound on really loud. Some of you might be wearing headphones. Some of you might have the window open and can feel a cold breeze on you. Loads of different things that can influence your sensory processing experience right now. So just take a minute to have a think about what sensory information you might be processing right now. What can you hear? What can you feel? What can you see? I won't give too much away, just have a think about what's going on around you and how your body's feeling. I'll give you a few seconds to think about that. So I've just had a little think, and I can hear my fridge whirring, I can hear my clock ticking, I can hear the school kids walking past the house, I can hear wind blowing down the chimney, I feel quite cold, I feel quite thirsty because I've done a lot of talking, and the screen's quite bright on my eyes, so I'm feeling a little bit quite bright. So at the moment I'm experiencing lots of different sensory input that we probably wouldn't have thought of unless you stop in the moment and realise all the sensory processing, all the sensory information that your body's having to process in this moment, whilst you're thinking you're only concentrating on one task. You think you're only probably listening to this presentation, but actually all this external sensory input your body is processing behind the scenes. So we're receiving all this sensory information, and I'm not totally distracted by it, and that's because our brains collect all this information. It's all being sent into our body, but our brains act like a sieve, and the information gets sieved out, and the brain only uses the sensory information it needs. It's able to discard the humming of the fridge because at the moment that's not priority. What priority is that I'm focusing on this task. So our brains have a really clever way of just discarding all the information that it doesn't need. It sensed it, but it discards it and only focuses on what it needs in that moment. However, as we all know, not everyone's brain does this the same way or the most efficient way. And this is where sensory processing difficulties come into play, because some people's brains might not find it as easy to discard all information, or discard the information that's not useful and only keep the one that is. Everybody's brains process it differently. So we have 8 senses altogether, and on the slide I've put 5 of them in white as they tend to be the most familiar senses that people know, and then we do have also 3 additional senses that aren't so well known or familiar with everybody, so we'll run through them. So we've got sight, so this can be referred to as visual. I have put next to what sense, another different terminology you might hear sometimes. So we've got sight, smell can be referred to olfactory, taste can be referred to as gustatory, sound, auditory, touch, tactile is sometimes referred to, and this isn't just touch with your hands and fingers, this can be touch sensations all over the body. And then we move on to the ones I've highlighted black. So we've got vestibular. I'll go into this one in a bit more detail in the next few slides, but this is your body's balance sense. And then we've got proprioception. This is your body's positioning sense of where your body is in space. And then we've got interoception, and this is about our inner body sensations. So the proprioceptive sense, proprioception, it's the sense that helps us know where our body is in space. So basically, if you look at the diagram on the left, the brain sends a signal to the muscles, which asks the muscles to do whatever we're asking it to do. So this may be any form of movement, walking, running, cycling, sitting, lying down, whatever we're asking our bodies to do. Our bodies will respond, and then this movement then sends a signal through our nerves back to the brain to let us know where our body is in space, and this helps us do things, anything throughout our day. So sitting here right now listening to this presentation, our proprioceptive sense is working. So this sense lets you know about your body parts and how they're moving. So I'm going to use a time when we have pins and needles, for example, and sometimes when we have pins and needles we go really tense and our body parts don't move as well for that short amount of time, and it's our proprioceptive sense that lets us know that our hand can't, or any part of the body that has that pins and needles can't move as effectively at the moment, and that sends the message. Those muscles then send that message to the brain. Having a good proprioceptive sense can be quite calming for the whole sensory system, because the more you know where your body is without having to rely on your other senses can be quite calming and relaxing, knowing that that's not something your other senses have to pick up on to help you to know where your body is in space. As I've said in previous slides, the proprioceptive system affects all the movement and motor aspects of your body. So from postural skills, balance skills, motor control, even oral motor skills, the muscles in your mouth, motor planning, and at the end I put emotional regulation in bold, because when your proprioceptive system is under responsive, this is when, going back to our scale of regulation with the engine speed, having these senses over or under responsive can then start to tip this scale. If the input is too much or if the input is too little, it can then get this scale moving and can cause some emotional dysregulation. So poor proprioceptive processing can be seen in individuals in many different ways. Sometimes under responsive systems can be seen in individuals as maybe risk-taking behaviours, maybe like climbing things or seeking lots of additional movement, or it could be the flip side of decreased body awareness, lots of crashing and bumping into things, really poor body awareness, maybe some reduced muscle tone. And these individuals can be seen to maybe seek additional movement and input to bring up their level of regulation so they can feel more regulated, putting in that excessive sensory input through movement. And then we have our vestibular sense, which is our balance sense. So in our inner ear, we have a small bit of fluid in our inner ear in these semicircular canals you can see on the picture. And when we move our body, when we move side to side, up and down, rolling, this little bit of fluid in the inner ear moves about, and it helps us to know again where our body is in space. So our balance, are we upside down, are we lying down, are we jumping? So this little bit of fluid moves like an inner spirit level. So too much sensory input of the vestibular sense can be dysregulating, and too little input of vestibular sense can also be dysregulating. So it's about finding a balance with this. So an example is fair rides, for example. Some people love them, some people hate them, and this is all because we process sensory information slightly differently. For those who absolutely love spinning, crashing, whirling around on fair rides and theme parks, then maybe your vestibular sense is slightly under responsive, that you enjoy this excessive movement to get this inner ear fluid moving. Or if you're someone who absolutely hates those sort of things, or any sort of sudden movements or lots of movements and moving your head about, then your vestibular sense could be over responsive, meaning that too much of that information can be quite dysregulating to you quite quickly. But even if you are under responsive and you like seeking this vestibular response, you can still receive too much of this vestibular response, and this is where it can cause sickness and dizziness, and we all have a different level of threshold for that. So the vestibular sense and the proprioceptive sense do sometimes go hand in hand when it comes to contributing towards the different functional skills that we do day in, day out. So again, your postural skills, your balance skills, motor control. Vestibular definitely more so affects your head movements and directions, body orientation and acceleration. And again, I've put at the end the emotional regulation aspect of this, as too much or too little can impact emotional regulation. So some behaviours we might see resulting from poor vestibular processing can be climbing, hanging upside down, decreased awareness of where your body is in space, so maybe like tripping up, or like I say, walking into walls or doors, lots of hanging upside down or lying back with your head off the sofa, lying back off chairs, or lots of active movement to get that inner ear fluid moving to get a higher sensory response from your vestibular system. And then we have interoception, which is the ability to sense any body signals that you're receiving. So whether you are feeling hungry or whether you're full, if you can feel like your heart rate, like your heart beating, or if you need the toilet or not. Interoception really helps us to understand our physical and emotional states. So it's an important function to manage these emotions, and knowing when to eat or drink. It's also how we experience sensations inside our body. So everything that's going on inside the body is that interoceptive sense.
So now we're going to talk about some top tips for coping with change and transitions. One of the most important things that you can do for your children is to support yourself in being able to approach their difficulties. So what is really helpful to consider is the approach of mindful parenting, where you're listening to your child with full attention, non-judgmentally accepting yourself and your child, being emotionally aware of yourself and your child, using self-regulation in your relationship with your child, so looking after yourself and knowing what you need to feel safe and calm, because you can't offer them what they need if you're not in a calm place. And then having compassion for yourself and for your child. We did do a webinar about mindful parenting, which you might be able to find online, which might give you a bit more information about it, but it was just introducing it as a way of approaching challenging situations, especially with your children. What we want to be able to do is get to a point where we can co-regulate. So we talk a bit about self-regulation. We hear that quite often. Children need to know how to self-regulate. Actually, they can't self-regulate until we have co-regulated with them. Co-regulation is the process of us feeling safe, us putting out that safeness to our children and tolerating whatever comes up for them so they can find their way through it in relation to us and us being that safe base. So to be able to co-regulate, it's really important that you notice if you're becoming dysregulated and owning your own state in that respect. So own it if you're feeling overwhelmed and do something to make yourself feel safer and calmer so that you can help your child. Take a moment to do what you need. So know what it is that you need and take a moment to, come back to that. Build a kit bag, and we'll talk about that a bit later on. Build a kit bag of things that make you feel soothed, that give you that moment that you need before you can then turn towards your child's distress. Step towards them with compassion and presence. Pay attention to your cues of presence. So think about softening your body language, maybe soften your facial expression, shift the tone of your voice to a more compassionate tone. Take into account that whole body presence when you're trying to help your child find their way through. It's really important that you work on validating their emotions. Whatever they're feeling, it is valid. It may feel really difficult to not take things personally sometimes when children feel overwhelmed or angry or feel like there's something that we should be doing differently. But whatever they're feeling is important, and it's important to make sure you give them that space of, owning some of that and going, that sounds really difficult. I'm so sorry you're feeling so overwhelmed right now. And then make sure whenever you are having these conversations with your children, you're checking in with yourself throughout. Take a deep breath when you need it. Have something with you from your kit bag that might make you feel a bit soothed. And know that whatever they're feeling is not your fault or theirs. Okay, so to start off with, in terms of our top tips, the first thing that we really need to make sure we do is name it and make space to share and express what our children are feeling. I think a lot of people feel like acknowledging the difficulty can sometimes make things worse, and actually often it's the opposite way around. The more we pretend it's not happening and the more we kind of suppress it and shut it out and leave it behind a locked door, the bigger it can feel and the more energy it takes to hold it behind that door. So we need to name it to tame it. Notice, acknowledge and name the transition. Own what it is that they're facing and spend that time exploring what's going on for them around it. Provide plenty of opportunities to express any associated feelings, hopes, fears and expectations around the transition. Really listen to them when they're upset especially. Pay attention, maintain eye contact, let them talk through it, and again validate all those experiences and feelings that they're having. You could potentially ask them to draw what they're feeling if that would help, or act it out, or create it out of Play-Doh. Do something that's creative that allows them to use their hands whilst they're exploring and talking, because that makes it so much easier sometimes for us to share. It could also be helpful to help them express how they're feeling through getting them to rate their experiences or their fears or their expectations or their hopes. So you could have a little look at rating parts of the school that are particularly scary. So is this bit about school not scary, or is it all the way up to really scary? Just to help them to really turn inwards and understand what it is that they're anxious about. You could create a worry book for your child to record their anxieties. It could be something that they could do before starting school and take it with them to school, make notes throughout the day or even after school, where they have a space to process what's come up for them and understand why they're feeling the way they are. I think an important note to make in terms of these tips is that it can be very difficult to tolerate the distress in our children. It can be really tricky for us to see them upset and not want to just swoop in and save it. It's really important instead that we don't just try and problem solve and try and fix the problem, instead that we give them that open, calm, communicative space where they feel validated and heard and seen in their experience. So I am now going to introduce you to the PACE model. Some of you may have come across this before, but it's a wonderful model to be mindful of when we're navigating these conversations with our children. It stands for playfulness, acceptance, curiosity, and empathy. So if we're aware of those 4 concepts and we're aware of how we could potentially take them into our conversations with our children, it means we give them an opportunity to really have a healing and therapeutic conversation. If we hold on to that playfulness, just give them a little bit of place to kind of find some joy in some difficult conversations, it can really diffuse some tension. It can really enhance their sense of enjoyment when exploring their emotions and difficulties. Acceptance is about not judging them for whatever comes up for them, and about making sure that they know that they are loved no matter what they experience, no matter what they say, no matter what they are feeling. Our curiosity is just about helping them to turn inward. So I wonder what's going on for you here. I wonder what was happening when you said this. I wonder why you feel this way. Tell me a little bit more about that. I'm really curious. I want to understand. Then we have empathy. And empathy can be something that we expect to be doing all the time, or we think that we're doing all the time, but actually the reality of empathy is it's really quite complicated, and we often misunderstand it, and we're often using something more sympathy based than we are empathy. So I have got a quick video which I think explains it really beautifully that I hope it will play. I hope you enjoyed that wonderful little video about the differences that we experience in sympathy and empathy. So now we've named it and we've tamed it and we've validated how they're feeling, it's important to consider how we can help them prepare for the change that's coming up. And the key part of helping them prepare is having plenty of time to get ready for it, talking about upcoming transitions way before they're happening, and planning how you can support them in getting back into a routine. So you might even have those sorts of conversations at the beginning of the school holidays, where you'll say, right, in 6 weeks' time, this is what we're going to plan to get back towards doing. But the most important thing is around a transition to keep the rest of their life feeling consistent and predictable. So as long as the rest of their life is the same, or at least as similar as it can be, it can make it a little bit easier to find our way through anything that is change and transition based. So it allows us to widen that window of tolerance when the rest of our life is predictable and consistent, so that we can just help to kind of navigate those problems and that anxiety that comes up when things are changing somewhere else in another part of our life. It's important they get enough sleep as much as possible, because plenty of sleep will help them to feel more in control and able to cope with any new experiences. Make sure wherever you can to provide them with nutritious and sustaining food, because again, that will really help their bodies to feel ready and able to respond to the anxiety they might feel. And this is also really important in terms of consistency and trustworthy with our word. So say what you mean. If you say in 10 minutes you've got to turn off that iPad, in 10 minutes they need to turn off that iPad, because it's so important they know that what you are directing them to do, what the rules are from your point of view, are enforced and are containing and are boundaried in a way that will make them feel safe.
So leading on from what Bridgitte was saying about change being difficult and unpredictability without routine can cause that friction and uncomfortableness, and sometimes making a sense of unsafety and not knowing what to expect. So having good routines in place sets the expectations and provides a sense of safety and containment. And when there is a clear routine and expectations in place, you might find that you see change levels of regulation or dysregulation and flipping the lid when there is lack of structure or loose structure, or even like sudden changes can flip that lid. So have a little think now about your own routines and expectations and what's going really well and what does work, and also what are the things that don't work so well. And if we can identify those two things, we could maybe adjust the things that don't work so well with elements of things that do work so well. What is it about the things that work well? Is it the time of day? Is it the environment? What sensory aspects are there around the elements of routine that are working well? And on the flip side, consider the same things for the things that aren't working so well at the moment. And if it is a relatively new routine, or for example, starting back school, just be realistic and kind to yourself. Like, set a new routine, and for it to become an automatic behaviour takes time. Like, the average time to set a new habit and routine is roughly 66 days, and that's on average. So it could be more or less, give and take either way. But the most important thing is to be consistent with routine, because consistency sets expectations. And even if the routine hasn't been as successful every day as you'd hoped, if you'd done it for the past 66 days, then day 67 and day 68, you're going to have that expectation installed inside you, because you've done it on the past 66, 65, 64 days. And every day is different. Not every day goes to plan, and not every day is a perfect day. So be kind to yourself, because if routine doesn't go to plan one day, that doesn't mean it doesn't have to not go to plan every day. Consistency is key with building routine and expectations.
So alongside all that planning and consistency and predictability and routine, it can be helpful to start getting them a bit more use of those prompts and indicators in the weeks leading up to coming back into school, because they're going to have plenty of those in school, plenty of opportunities for teachers and staff that work with them to kind of give them those preempted prompts and warnings when things are about to change. So starting to use that kind of language and getting their bodies used to things shifting and changing at home is a great place to start. So provide them with regular reminders that you're about to stop an activity before. So give them a 10-minute reminder, maybe a 5-minute, and then 2 minutes. So they've got plenty of time to prepare themselves for that change of activity. You could potentially use a bit of a staged warning system that signals upcoming change, like a countdown or cue cards or a light changing system. You may also wish to teach them transition skills through using different sounds. So when this noise plays out, we're going to move to doing this. Or when this song plays out, this is what's going to happen. So giving them that time to prepare their bodies to respond to change in their environment.
So following on from Bridgette's prompts and indicators, but more from a sensory perspective, it might be helpful to consider the time of day when your child is completing an activity. If they find it more stressful at a certain time of day, maybe we can have a look at if there's any additional sensory input happening then that wouldn't at a different time of day. This could even be that there's an expectation or a demand placed on a child at the end of a school day when they weren't expecting it, or maybe they've had a long school day and they're quite tired, and maybe that part of the routine isn't as effective at that time of day. Maybe it might be more effective in the morning when they're less tired. Also, another tip may be to, when communicating with the child, getting their attention first by using their name or tapping them on the arm before giving them information. This can really help with sensory overload, because if the child's not actively listening and then the information is put on top, this can quickly move your child up that engine and speed scale. Also, maybe pre-warning a child when they're about to enter a situation that may be quite a provoking sensory experience. So there's planning and preparing before going into those sorts of environments. Or for example, if you know that maybe we won't be able to have something to eat or drink for a long while, preparing your child that the next time they'll be able to eat or drink might help the situation. And also just having awareness of your child's sensory environment generally. So considering if the radio's on, TV's on, bright lights, what sort of environment is happening in that moment whilst that child is trying to complete a task. And if that task isn't as successful as you'd hoped, what other input is that child experiencing in that moment? If a child has sensory difficulties in terms of touch, tactile sensitivities, if they don't like light pressure or anything, tags in clothing can also be quite a challenging sensory input to deal with. So cutting these out of clothing can be really helpful.
Now we're going to talk about promoting choice and mastery. We can't remove transition and change from our children's lives. We know that we've had to help them name it, validate how they feel about it, plan for it, prepare for it, and start getting used to those prompts of change. What we really now want to do is give them an opportunity to feel a sense of mastery over what's coming up for them and choice, and know that they do have a voice and they can be empowered to find their way through. So support them in having a really clear understanding of what the transition is, what is expected and what is required of them. So my body needs to move from this to that on this day. I will go to school in this car, and when we get to school, this is what's going to happen. Have those conversations and plan it, and give them a choice and a chance to really know what to expect, even in the things that can feel quite unexpected. Decrease uncertainty through explicitly talking about and showing them visual timetables, checklists, and what is going to happen before, during, and after the transition. Maybe create a colourful and visual, clear transition-focused timetable calendar that gives them a bit of an indicator about what's happening today, tomorrow, and soon. The soon part's important, because it may well be that school doesn't start for a few days or a few weeks, but knowing it's coming up is a great place to start in terms of knowing in your mind, when I see that board, I see soon, I know it's there. It's not the unacknowledged. We need to start using anchoring words like when and then, before, after, and next, now and next, just to give them a bit more prompting and structure around knowing what changes are happening. It's really important as well to facilitate visits and tours of the schools wherever you can, and to start getting them prepared for and used to and knowing what that school looks like and how it's going to feel for them. I know that's not always possible, and it may well be that children are going back to a school that they've already been to before, but things can still feel different. So if you can, that's always a great start to do. And involve them in understanding which room they're going to go to first, what time they go there for, and how long they might be there, why they're going to be there, and what is going to happen next. So these are just some examples of some visual timetables that could really help with getting a bit of structure around preparing them. So it might well be that you have this today, tomorrow and soon board that gives you an indicator of what's coming up soon in their life. You might have a now and next board. So on this one you can see now is the homework and next is they can have access to their tablet. There may well be a timetable or at least a bit of a routine around how to arrive at school. So here we have taking off coat, opening the backpack, taking out their work, taking out their lunch, hanging up their coat, hanging up their backpack, really breaking it down to every single small step so it feels more manageable. And then you have a daily tasks one here that kind of gives again a little bit of a space to come back to make sure they've done each individual thing that they need to do to move through their day. So linking in with promoting choice and mastery, we may well benefit from practicing some scenarios they could face through role plays. So if they feel really self-conscious and uncomfortable with the idea of role plays, what you might want to do is use toys or puppets and give a bit of fun to kind of play with what might have come up for them and explore the different what ifs they might be having. Support them in choosing some items they can have with them when they go back into school that help them to feel safe. So maybe a particular toy or particular item or a little object they can put in their pocket that will just help them to kind of remind them that they're okay and it's safe. Support your child in taking ownership of their transition wherever you can. So they're moving to a new school, they could take photos of it or ask for photos of it or draw it or decorate notebooks in preparation, make an all about me book for staff to know them better. They can take in and show their teachers so they know that the teachers know the most important things about them. You'll find that they really take ownership of that project. In my experience of doing that with children, they've really loved that and the opportunity to talk about themselves and what's really important to them. And I mentioned this before for yourselves, but it's really good to build a kit bag of things that will make them feel safe and regulated. So we're going to talk about what we might put in those kit bags in a moment. And make them feel as safe and as comfortable as possible. And this is both physically and emotionally. Make sure there's anything to do with their uniform or their books or their school bags that could be adapted to make them feel more comfortable. So when we talk about kit bags, I like to think of them as compassionate kit bags. And there's been some wonderful research into the impact this can have on allowing us to find our way through stress and shame and trauma and to know that we can be kind to ourselves. In these kit bags, think about smells, so essential oils that could be calming and uplifting. So when they're really flat and low and disconnected and numb on that window of tolerance on the lower down part, you might want a smell that's quite uplifting to bring them up. If they're really hyper-aroused and overwhelmed and really dysregulated and explosive, you'll want a smell that will help them to feel calm. Children will need both of those at some point or another. So experiment with them, get a selection of different oils and just, see which ones they really lean into and they really enjoy. You could do it through hand lotions or candles or incense. We can also then introduce some imagery, so pictures or photographs or just little tokens they can have in their bag that again remind them to be nice to themselves and kind to themselves. Think about what music they respond really well to, so what songs they love and what sounds they love, and just create a really calming playlist. Consider touch and any soothing items that can really help them feel grounded and calm and soothed. So any little toys perhaps they love holding, any little blankets they have that are soft. And then taste, so what's their favourite chocolate, what's their favourite sour sweet, something that gives them a real burst of flavour that can shift them in terms of state. And then the other thing is thinking about writing little kind letters to them or postcards, and take what you need tokens, which I'll show you later on, that you can pop in their lunchbox.
Leading on from what Bridgitte was saying about choice and mastery leads us on to self-regulation and self-regulation tools. So self-regulation is about developing the ability to regulate your own emotions, thoughts and behaviours without input from somebody else. So managing those moments yourself, or accessing resources, activities or equipment that might make you feel more regulated. So here are just a few images of different self-regulating tools. So first we've got a collection of different fidget toys, which can be quite self-soothing and self-regulating, fidgeting in your hands. Then we've got the ear defenders. If you're quite auditory sensitive, ear defenders can really dull and lower that noise in the environment. And then we've got a water bottle, but a water bottle with a straw. So this really is quite regulating because of the suction aspect of it. It helps. It activates the oral motor sense in your mouth. So going back to the proprioception that we were talking about, it adds that proprioceptive input and can be quite regulating and grounding by adding that sensory input. And quite similar with the electric toothbrushes too. This can be a really good tool for first thing in the morning, for adding that sensory input, again that proprioceptive input, having that vibration. And then star breathing is quite a nice regulating technique to learn, and it can be done with your hand. If you breathe in and out, up and down your fingers like a star, and that's a tool that a child could learn independently. So some more tips for supporting self-regulation. If you do need to assist your child with dressing and self-care, try and use firmer pressure rather than lighter pressure, and this doesn't mean squeezing and grabbing, just a bit more heavier handed than the light touch, because light touch can be quite uncertain and can be dysregulating to some. Some children can find chewing foods quite regulating, and having that sensory feedback in their mouth. Chewing is activating the muscles in the mouth, giving you that proprioceptive sense. And this can also be done through eating crunchy foods as well. And alongside that, in terms of like drinks, like cold drinks are quite orally stimulating for taste and sensation, or maybe like a thick milkshake is quite regulating, again using that straw and those oral motor muscles. Maybe consider some heavy muscle work like rolling, jumping, climbing, like soft play areas and playgrounds, giving you all that bodily sensation and feedback. If your child has difficulty maybe sitting still or fidgeting around, a wobble cushion is just like a air-filled cushion that you can put on your chair and sit on, and that helps gain some movement. That'll be your vestibular, your inner ear balance, your vestibular sense, giving you that extra feedback. Also consider any sensory aspects and opportunities in like your tactile sense. So yeah, any fidget toys or like feely bags with different types of materials, any messy play, like putting your hands through lentils or oats, loads of different textures might be quite regulating. Also consider the strategies that are already working. Maybe sit back and watch what type of things from a sensory perspective that your child is going to, and maybe implement some more of those types of things if they have a sensory preference. Creating a calm space or a quiet, comfortable, chill out space in the environment, whether that be classroom, home, any space, so the individual knows they can take themselves off to that space. That's a good self-regulating opportunity in the environment. sometimes we can be at a level of dysregulation that it affects our communication, so we won't be able to seek that co-regulation. So having that additional space to go and seek that self-regulation is a great opportunity to provide. Or alternatively, if you've got a child who is continuously seeking movement, lots of crashing, moving about all the time, maybe providing some equipment or a safe space where they are able to safely engage in those activities in your environment, again, whether that be home or school or wherever, where they can get that feedback but in a safe way.
So now we've done the naming it and taming it, the validating the emotions, the planning and preparation and prompting, and there's promoting that sense of choice and mastery and building up kit bags to help them feel more able to cope and developing all the sensory strategies that make them feel soothed. We're going to have a think about praising and encouraging and how important that is to help our children feel able to cope. So I'd really encourage you to spend some time to reflect on any previous transitions that you've mastered. Magnify the lessons they've learnt from these and the skills and factors that made it possible. So why did they do so well with it? How did they move in between things so well, even just moving from their bedroom to the bathroom to brush their teeth? If that for some children it could be a really big achievement, honing on that and celebrating every single individual achievement can really make them feel more able to approach a new change. Talk about those smaller things, like those many day-to-day transitions, and encourage and praise every effort they make to try and navigate their upcoming change, how they're feeling about it, any suggestions they have in managing, and all the steps they are taking to try and find their way through. Praise any progress they have on specific tasks, like completing something they find difficult, putting on their school uniform, or walking to school or past the school. Okay, so now what we need to do is prepare them for separation. One of the challenging things for them coming back into school is actually being away from their family that they've just spent the last 6 weeks playing with and being with. So it can be really difficult to know that now the whole day is going to be spent away from people that they love and feel safe with. So I say one of the most important things to do is to find ways to show them that they'll be kept in mind even when they're not physically with you. So you might do that through making little cards or post-it notes to put in their bag or their pocket to remind them that you love them, that you're thinking of them, and you're there for them. I've got some examples to show you in a moment. You could have matching bracelets to represent that you're always connected, or give them a little mini brain soft toy to represent how they are always on your mind. Just something that when they look at it will make them feel warm and make them feel known, seen, thought of, considered and loved. Make time for quality time together after they've returned from school each day to talk to them about how their day was and support them in processing whatever's come up for them whilst they've been at school that day. And be optimistic, because children can pick up on everything that we're feeling. Our anxiety can quickly become theirs, so it's important to contain any difficulties that you're feeling and experiencing and come back to knowing how to navigate those things in your own nervous system to feel safe and calm so that you can co-regulate and respond to what comes up for them and allow them to find their way through what comes up. So these are just some examples of what you might want to put in your children's lunchbox or pocket, whatever works best for them. So these are wonderful take what you need tokens, which you can find a PDF for online, and I think they're really lovely. And each day you could put a slightly different one in depending on what you think they might need that day. You can print them off and laminate them or just print them, or you can write your own versions of them. So each day perhaps you could put in their love, or you could put in their bravery, happiness, whatever they might be struggling with that day that they might well need a little bit extra for later on in the day, just to remind them that you thought of them, that you know that they're going through what they're going through and that you believe in them. These are some wonderful examples that you can find on Twinkle. Again, these are free resources created by the Happy newspaper, which is a wonderful resource if you're ever interested in looking at it. It's a newspaper that's written every few months, just full of wonderful, happy things. But they've created these beautiful resources, and these are little cards that you can put in their bags, so little positive notes. So the thing I love most about you, I love it when we do this, or each day is a new beginning with no mistakes. And the bigger you dream, the further you'll go. And you make me smile every day. I just thought these are lovely examples. There's a big PDF online that you can get with more on there. And just to finish off, these are their lunchbox notes. So again, PDF, you can go online through Twinkle for free, and they're little prompts of things that you might want to put in your child's lunchbox or pocket, just again to remember that you're believing in them, you think of them, and you love them. So that's everything from us today on how to help your children navigate transitions back into education. Unfortunately, because it's recorded, we don't have opportunities to answer your questions directly, but please feel free to submit any questions that you have